What unbelievable science mysteries are they actually true? Story 1. Picture a world where power lines transmit electricity with zero loss, where maglev trains float and glide with no friction at all, where your laptop never needs a fan, because nothing inside it generates resistive heat. This isn't science fiction. It's the practical consequence of a single material science breakthrough that researchers across the world are racing to achieve. A superconductor that works at room temperature and normal atmospheric pressure. Superconductivity itself isn't new. It was discovered in 1911, but every superconductor found since then has required extreme cooling, typically with liquid helium or liquid nitrogen, to reach the critical temperature where electrical resistance drops to exactly zero. That cooling requirement is the only thing standing between superconductivity and total integration into daily life. Power grids currently lose an estimated 5% of generated electricity to resistance during transmission. A room temperature superconducting grid would lose essentially none of it. The research frontier right now involves hydrogen-rich compounds, hydrides, that have demonstrated superconductivity at temperatures approaching room temperature, but only under pressures equivalent to those found deep inside the Earth's mantle. That's the current trade-off, warmer. But you need a diamond anvil cell generating millions of atmospheres of pressure to make it work. Getting both conditions, warm and unpressurized, simultaneously is the holy grail that multiple well-funded labs are chasing, using machine learning models that can predict candidate materials before anyone has to synthesize them. When it happens, and most researchers in the field believe it's a matter of when, not if, it won't just be an incremental improvement. It will rewrite the economics of electric motors, emery machines, particle accelerators, and the entire global power grid simultaneously. The energy revolution everyone is waiting for might already be sitting in a materials database, waiting to be found. Story 2, this one already happened, and most people have no idea. In 2016, China launched Mikius, the world's first quantum communication satellite, and used it to demonstrate something that sounds like it should still be theoretical: quantum key distribution between ground stations thousands of kilometers apart, using entangled photon pairs to generate encryption keys that are physically impossible to intercept without detection. Here's the actual physics, and it's wild. When two photons are quantum entangled, measuring the state of one instantly determines the state of the other, regardless of the distance between them. If someone tries to intercept and read an entangled photon mid-transmission, the act of measurement itself collapses the quantum state, which means the interception isn't just detected, it's structurally unavoidable that it gets detected. You can't eavesdrop on a quantum key exchange without the eavesdropping itself corrupting the data in a way both legitimate parties will immediately notice. This isn't strong encryption. This is encryption where the laws of physics themselves prevent the attack from working silently. China has used Mikius to establish quantum encrypted video calls between Beijing and Vienna, demonstrated entanglement distribution across distances exceeding 1,200 kilometers, and has continued expanding the program with additional satellites and ground infrastructure. The US, the EU, and other nations are racing to build comparable infrastructure, partly because whoever controls quantum-secure communication networks first has a meaningful strategic advantage in an era where data interception is a constant, ongoing concern for every government on Earth. The technology isn't available to ordinary consumers yet. It's currently limited to government and select institutional applications, but the principle has moved from theoretical physics paper to operational satellite hardware. Unhackable communication isn't a someday technology. It's already in orbit. Story 3. CRISPR-Cas9 works by using a guide RNA molecule to direct a cutting enzyme to a precise location in a genome, where it slices both strands of the DNA double helix. The cell's own repair machinery then either disables the targeted gene or, if scientists provide a new template, replaces the cut sequence with something different. It's genuinely accurate to describe this as cut and paste editing of the genetic code. and it's precise enough that the first CRISPR-based therapy received FDA approval in December 2023, a functional cure for sickle cell disease. Officially, this is the entire story. A transformative medical technology curing genetic diseases that were previously permanent. Unofficially, the human enhancement question is not purely speculative fan fiction. DARPA, the same agency that gave us GPS and the foundational technology behind the internet, has openly funded research programs exploring genetic and biological enhancement of soldiers, including projects examining stress resistance, accelerated wound healing, and metabolic efficiency under combat conditions. These programs are publicly acknowledged to exist, even though the specific outcomes and current status are not transparent. China has previously demonstrated a willingness to cross ethical lines that most of the international research community considers firm. The 2018 case of He Jiankui, who used CRISPR to edit the germline of twin embryos, resulting in actual gene-edited babies born with modified CCR5 genes, was condemned globally and landed him in prison. But it also proved definitively that the technical capability for human germline editing already exists and has already been used. The gap between officially for curing disease and could theoretically enhance a human is not a technical gap. It's a regulatory and ethical one. The tool doesn't know the difference. Story 4 in March 1989, Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann announced they had achieved nuclear fusion at room temperature using a simple electrochemical cell with palladium electrodes in heavy water. The claim, if true, meant unlimited clean energy from a tabletop device. Within months, laboratories worldwide had attempted to replicate the experiment and largely failed. The scientific consensus turned decisively against cold fusion. Careers were damaged, and the term became synonymous with bad science and premature announcement. What most people don't know is that research into the underlying phenomenon never actually stopped. It just rebranded. The field now operates under the term low-energy nuclear reactions, or LENR, and a small but persistent community of researchers, including some at respected institutions, continues investigating anomalous heat effects in metal hydrogen systems under specific conditions. The Department of Energy has periodically reviewed LENR research, and while official conclusions have remained skeptical, the reviews have not been uniformly dismissive. Some panel members have noted that certain anomalous heat results deserve continued investigation rather than blanket rejection. NASA's own Glenn Research Center has had researchers exploring LENR phenomena, and several patents related to LENR-adjacent technology have been filed by major aerospace and energy companies over the past 2 decades, generally without significant public attention. The honest scientific position remains that no one has demonstrated a reliable, reproducible cold fusion reaction that satisfies the standards required to overturn the original skepticism. But the field that supposedly died in 1989 has continued, quietly, in smaller labs and occasional government-adjacent funding streams, animated by the possibility that the original experiment captured a real but poorly understood and poorly controlled phenomenon rather than nothing at all. Story 5. Elon Musk's Neuralink gets the headlines, the public demonstrations, and the cultural attention. But the foundational research enabling brain-machine interfaces was developed largely through DARPA-funded programs that have been running since the early 2000s, decades before Neuralink existed as a company. DARPA's Revolutionizing Prosthetics program, launched in 2006, funded the development of advanced prosthetic limbs that could be controlled directly by neural signals, restoring function to amputees with a level of dexterity that previous prosthetics couldn't approach. This program produced the modular prosthetic limb, capable of complex, individual finger movements controlled by signals recorded directly from the brain or residual nerve tissue. DARPA has also funded direct cortical interface research that allowed paralyzed patients to control robotic arms with thought alone, demonstrated in peer-reviewed published research well before Neuralink's first public demonstrations. The military applications driving this research are straightforward and openly stated: restoring function to wounded service members, and, in less publicly detailed programs, exploring direct neural control interfaces for operating equipment, vehicles, or systems without conventional manual controls. DARPA's next-generation non-surgical neurotechnology program has specifically funded research into non-invasive brain interfaces that don't require the kind of implant surgery Neuralink's device requires, aiming for comparable signal resolution through external or minimally invasive means. None of this diminishes what Neuralink has accomplished. Its specific implant technology and the speed of its human trials represent genuine engineering achievement. But the foundational science, the proof of concept that brains can reliably control external devices through direct neural interface, and a substantial portion of the underlying technology stack trace back to defense research that received far less media attention while doing the harder, earlier work. Story 6. This sounds like it should be a joke, but NASA's EagleWorks laboratory, based at the Johnson Space Center, has genuinely conducted research into the physics of faster-than-light travel concepts, working from the mathematics published by physicist Miguel Alcubierre in 1994. Alcubierre's contribution was a solution to Einstein's field equations describing a method of travel that doesn't require moving faster than light through space, which special relativity forbids, but instead proposes warping space itself, contracting space in front of a ship and expanding it behind, allowing the ship to effectively surf a wave of distorted spacetime. The ship inside this warp bubble would remain stationary relative to its local space, technically never breaking the speed of light limit, while the bubble itself could carry it across vast distances in a fraction of the time conventional travel would require. The catch, and it's an enormous catch, is that the original Alcubierre solution requires negative energy density, a form of exotic matter that has never been confirmed to exist in usable quantities. And the total energy requirement calculated for the original proposal was, depending on the model, comparable to the mass energy of an entire planet, or even the observable universe. This is why warp drive has remained firmly in the theoretical physics category rather than the engineering category for most of the scientific community. EagleWorks, under physicist Harold Sonny White, has worked on refining the energy requirements through modified geometries, exploring whether a toroidal or different-shaped warp bubble could reduce the exotic energy requirement to something theoretically more plausible, though still nowhere near achievable with current technology. The lab has also investigated other propulsion concepts that generated controversy, including the M-drive, which was eventually shown not to produce genuine thrust. NASA isn't building a warp ship, but a government-funded lab is genuinely doing peer-reviewed mathematics on how one could theoretically work. Story 7. In 2020, researchers working with the Anita experiment, a balloon-borne detector flying over Antarctica designed to detect high-energy particles called neutrinos, recorded something that violates the basic physics of how neutrinos are supposed to behave. They detected particle signatures that appeared to be traveling upward, from inside the Earth, out through the planet's crust and into the detector above, the opposite direction from how cosmic neutrinos normally arrive. This matters because neutrinos at the energy level Anita was detecting should be almost entirely absorbed by the Earth's mass if they're traveling through the whole planet from the other side. A particle making that journey and emerging cleanly on the other side, behaving as though it had barely interacted with anything, doesn't fit the standard model of particle physics as currently understood. Several explanations have been proposed, ranging from mundane to genuinely strange. The most boring explanation is some kind of detector error or an unaccounted-for reflection effect in the Antarctic ice that made a downward traveling particle appear to be moving upward. This remains the most likely explanation by conventional scientific standards, and follow-up analyses have looked hard for instrumental causes. The genuinely strange proposed explanation, floated semi-seriously by physicists including Neil Turok and others, involves a cosmological model in which our universe is paired with a mirror universe created at the same Big Bang event, in which time runs in the opposite direction relative to ours. In this model, what Anita detected could be a signature of particles associated with that mirror universe bleeding through in a way that's detectable from our side. This remains a fringe but published hypothesis, not yet confirmed or ruled out. Somewhere, theoretically, a version of physics exists where effects precede their causes, which would make regret a genuinely useful early warning system rather than a retrospective one. Story 8, Turritopsis dohrnii, sometimes called the immortal jellyfish, has a biological capability that doesn't exist anywhere else in the animal kingdom in this specific form. When injured, stressed, starving, or simply old, it can revert its cells back to an earlier developmental stage and effectively restart its life cycle. An adult jellyfish facing existential threat transforms back into a polyp, its juvenile form, and grows back into an adult again. Cycle complete. Mortality bypassed, at least in theory. In laboratory observation, individual specimens have repeated this cycle indefinitely, without showing the cellular signs of aging that eventually kill every other studied organism. The mechanism involves a process called transdifferentiation, in which mature, specialized cells revert to a more flexible, undifferentiated state, and then redevelop into different cell types, essentially cellular time travel at the level of individual cells. This is mechanistically different from how most aging reversal research in humans is being approached, but the underlying question, can differentiated cells be induced to reset their developmental clock, is exactly the question driving a significant portion of human longevity research. This is not a fringe interest. Major longevity research initiatives have attracted billions of dollars in funding from tech billionaires, including Jeff Bezos and Sam Altman, among others, funding companies explicitly working on cellular reprogramming techniques inspired by exactly this kind of biological precedent. Altos Labs, backed by significant venture funding, is specifically focused on partial cellular reprogramming research with aging reversal as an explicit goal. Nobody has cracked the human version yet. Human cellular biology is vastly more complex than a jellyfish's, with cancer risk being the most significant practical barrier to inducing widespread cellular reprogramming in a full organism. But the proof of concept that a living organism can do this exists, swimming quietly in the ocean, having apparently solved a problem we're spending billions trying to even partially replicate. Story 9. In the 1950s, the U.S. Air Force funded a real, documented program called Project Silverbug, exploring the feasibility of disc-shaped aircraft using radically different propulsion principles from conventional jet engines. This wasn't fringe research. It was a legitimate military aerospace program connected to broader Cold War-era interest in advanced flight concepts that might give the U.S. an aerodynamic and strategic edge over the Soviet Union. Around the same period, multiple aerospace researchers, including some affiliated with major defense contractors, were exploring electrogravitics, the theoretical possibility that strong electric fields could interact with gravitational effects in ways that might enable propulsion without conventional thrust. Most of this research did not produce working technology by any account that has become public, and electrogravitics, as originally proposed, isn't considered physically viable by mainstream physics today. What keeps this conversation alive is the existence of declassified patents, real, filed, publicly searchable documents describing aircraft concepts that closely resemble what witnesses describe in UFO reports. Disc-shaped craft, exotic propulsion descriptions, and flight characteristics that don't match conventional aircraft. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and other major defense contractors have filed patents over the decades for craft designs and propulsion concepts that, read without context, sound remarkably like the flying saucer descriptions that have populated UFO reports since the 1940s and 50s. This doesn't prove that classified human aircraft account for all UFO sightings. Many credible cases involve flight characteristics like instantaneous acceleration and apparent disregard for inertia that go beyond what any disclosed or patented human technology describes. But it does establish, with documentary certainty, that military researchers have spent 70 years actively trying to build exactly the kind of craft that UFO witnesses describe, using documented programs with real budgets and real engineers, which makes the human technology explanation for at least some sightings considerably more plausible than pure speculation. Story 10: Acoustic levitation is a genuine, demonstrated physical phenomenon, not a fringe theory. By using carefully arranged ultrasonic transducers to create standing sound waves, scientists can generate regions of stable air pressure capable of suspending small objects in mid-air, held in place by the acoustic radiation pressure pushing against gravity. Researchers at institutions including the University of Bristol have demonstrated acoustic levitation of small water droplets, insects, and other lightweight objects, manipulating them through three-dimensional space, using nothing but precisely controlled sound. The technology has genuine practical research applications already. Pharmaceutical companies use acoustic levitation to study chemical reactions and crystal formation without the substance touching a container surface that might contaminate or interfere with the process. And it's been explored for handling extremely delicate or hazardous materials that shouldn't be touched directly. The scale problem is the real limitation. Current acoustic levitation can reliably lift objects weighing at most a few grams. We're talking about levitating insects and water droplets, not building blocks. Lifting something as heavy as a multi-ton quarried stone block would require sound intensities and frequencies that aren't achievable with any current technology, and would likely be hazardous or fatal to anyone nearby due to the energy levels involved. The ancient pyramid construction theory, that sound was used to move the multi-ton blocks of Giza or other megalithic sites, has essentially zero direct archaeological evidence supporting it, and conventional explanations involving ramps, levers, organized labor, and wooden sledges have substantial supporting evidence from tool marks, worker housing, and partial construction records. But the basic physics of using sound to manipulate matter without contact is not science fiction. It's a demonstrated laboratory phenomenon. We've just only scaled it to the size of a fruit fly, not a 70-ton granite block. Story 11. Okay, this one is the kind of fact that sounds made up specifically to mess with you, except it's published in an actual peer-reviewed gastroenterology journal. Human stomach acid is hydrochloric acid with a pH typically between 1 and 2. And remember, the pH scale runs from 0 to 14, with lower numbers indicating stronger acidity. A pH of 1 to 2 puts your stomach acid in roughly the same strength category as battery acid. A study published in the journal Gastrointestinal Endoscopy actually tested this directly, because patients do occasionally swallow foreign objects, including razor blades, and clinicians needed to understand the real risk profile rather than just guessing. Researchers found that the thickened back edge of a single-edged razor blade, the thicker, more structurally robust portion, fully dissolved after approximately 2 hours of immersion in simulated stomach acid conditions. This is genuinely useful clinical information, not just a fun fact, because it informs decisions about whether a swallowed object needs surgical or endoscopic removal versus whether it's reasonable to let the body's own digestive chemistry handle it, depending on the object's composition, size, and the patient's overall risk profile. That said, and this needs to be said clearly, the dissolving process takes hours, and a razor blade is sharp regardless of how quickly the metal itself is breaking down chemically. The acid dissolving it doesn't happen instantly, which means there's a meaningful window of time during which a genuinely sharp object is sitting inside your digestive tract, fully capable of causing internal lacerations, perforation, or bleeding well before the chemistry has had time to do anything. The dissolvability is real. It is not, under any circumstances, a reason to think swallowing a blade is fine. Your stomach is a strong acid bath. It is not a safety mechanism. Story 12. This is one of those physics demonstrations that looks like a special effect, but is actually a clean, well-understood optical phenomenon. total internal reflection. The same principle that makes fiber optic cables work, just demonstrated in an unusually visible and almost magical-looking way. Researchers at Harvard set up an experiment with a clear tank of water, with a stream of water flowing out through a hole on one side and down into a collection bucket below. They positioned a red laser pointed directly at the flowing stream of water as it exited the tank. What happened next is the part that looks like it shouldn't be possible. The laser light didn't just pass through the water stream and continue in a straight line. It got bent and trapped inside the curving arc of the water jet itself, traveling along the curved path of the falling water and emerging at the bottom, creating the visual effect of a glowing red waterfall. The physics explaining this involves the different densities and refractive properties of the water versus the surrounding air, combined with the angle at which the light hits the boundary between the two materials. When light traveling through a denser medium hits the boundary with a less dense medium at a sufficiently shallow angle, instead of passing through and refracting outward, it reflects entirely back into the denser medium. This is total internal reflection, and it's the exact principle that allows fiber optic cables to carry light signals across vast distances without the light simply leaking out the sides. As researchers gradually reduced the water flow, the laser stayed trapped within the shrinking stream right up until the water flow stopped entirely, at which point the trapping effect disappeared because there was no longer a curved water-air boundary to reflect against. Same physics that runs the internet, just visualized as a glowing waterfall in a lab. Story 13. Ask most people where Earth's oxygen comes from, and the answer you'll get is rainforests, probably with a specific mention of the Amazon as the lungs of the planet. It's a compelling image, and it's also, mechanistically, not where the majority of the oxygen actually originates. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, marine photosynthetic organisms, plankton, seaweed, and other ocean-dwelling photosynthesizers produce more than half of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. The specific organisms doing most of this work are phytoplankton, microscopic, single-celled marine organisms that exist in almost unimaginable quantities across the world's oceans, performing photosynthesis just like land plants, but collectively, at a scale that land-based forests simply cannot match, because the ocean covers roughly 71% of the planet's surface, and phytoplankton are distributed throughout the sunlit upper layers across nearly all of it. This doesn't mean rainforests aren't ecologically critical. They perform enormous carbon sequestration, support staggering biodiversity, and regulate regional and global climate patterns in ways that matter enormously. But the specific claim that rainforests are uniquely responsible for the air we breathe overstates their role in oxygen production specifically, even as it understates how critical they are for other reasons. This matters for how we think about environmental priorities and risk. Ocean health, acidification from absorbed CO2, warming surface temperatures, pollution affecting phytoplankton populations, has direct implications for the planet's oxygen supply that get far less public attention than deforestation does. The popular environmental narrative has, in this specific respect, pointed everyone's attention at the wrong ecosystem. The actual oxygen factory running the planet is mostly invisible, microscopic, and floating in the top few meters of the ocean's surface, doing the most important work nobody talks about. Story 14, land animals navigating home across vast distances, is impressive enough. But it turns out some marine species have developed something even more remarkable: the ability to sense Earth's magnetic field directly and use it as an internal navigational system, according to research compiled by the U.S. Geological Survey. Sea turtles are probably the best studied example. Loggerhead and other sea turtle species are born on specific beaches, swim out into the ocean as hatchlings, travel across literally thousands of miles of open water over years of their juvenile development, and then, astonishingly, return to nest on beaches remarkably close to where they themselves were born, sometimes returning to the exact same regional stretch of coastline. Researchers have demonstrated that turtles can detect both the magnetic field's intensity and its inclination angle, how deeply the field lines point toward the Earth at different latitudes, which together function like a built-in GPS coordinate system, allowing them to determine their approximate position on the globe, even in the featureless open ocean. Salmon use a comparable mechanism for one of nature's most demanding navigational feats, returning from the ocean to spawn in the exact same freshwater river system where they hatched, sometimes navigating up specific tributary streams with remarkable precision after years spent at sea. Research suggests salmon imprint on the magnetic signature of their home river system early in life and use that magnetic memory, combined with chemical cues detected through smell once they're close enough, to complete the journey home. The biological mechanism allowing magnetoreception, the actual cellular or molecular structure responsible for detecting magnetic fields, is still not completely understood, with competing theories involving magnetite particles in certain cells or light-sensitive proteins called cryptochromes that may respond to magnetic fields through quantum-level chemical reactions. We know the navigation works. We're still working out exactly how biology pulls it off. Story 15. This is the kind of fact that breaks your intuition immediately because it contradicts everything your eyes tell you about clouds. They look weightless. They drift. They look like the visual definition of something that has no mass at all. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, an average cumulus cloud, the puffy, cotton ball-shaped clouds you picture when someone says cloud, weighs approximately 1 million pounds. For comparison, a Boeing 747 fully loaded with cargo, fuel, and passengers weighs significantly less than that. So why doesn't a million-pound object plummet directly out of the sky? The answer involves a distinction between mass and density that's genuinely counterintuitive until you think it through carefully. A cumulus cloud is composed of an enormous number of extremely small water droplets. Each individual droplet is genuinely tiny and light, distributed across a massive volume of air. The key fact is that the moist air making up the cloud, despite containing all that water mass, is actually less dense than the dry air surrounding and beneath it. Warm, moist air is less dense than cool, dry air, which is exactly why clouds form in rising air currents in the first place. The warm, moist air is buoyant relative to its surroundings. The cloud isn't defying gravity. The water droplets are constantly falling, just incredibly slowly, because they're so small that air resistance almost completely counteracts gravitational pull on each individual droplet. The cloud as a whole structure is also constantly being replenished from below by more rising moist air, creating the illusion of a stable, weightless object when what's actually happening is a continuous, dynamic process of droplets falling at a near imperceptible rate, while new moisture continuously rises to replace the visual structure. It's not weightless, it's just falling so slowly, you'll never see it happen. Story 16, a single teaspoon of soil contains more organisms than there are people on Earth. This is one of those facts that should fundamentally change how you think about the ground beneath your feet. Because what feels like inert dirt is actually one of the densest concentrations of living biomass found anywhere on the planet. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, a single teaspoon of healthy soil contains more individual microorganisms than there are human beings currently alive on Earth, and Earth's human population is approaching 8 billion. The USDA describes soil as home to millions of distinct species and billions of individual organisms within any given sample: bacteria, algae, microscopic insects, earthworms, beetles, ants, mites, fungi, and a long list of other organisms working together in an ecosystem that most people walk over every single day without a second thought. This concentration of biomass and biodiversity, packed into a substance most of us treat as simply the surface we build on, represents one of the most underappreciated ecosystems on the planet. The functional importance of this hidden world is enormous. Soil organisms break down organic matter and recycle nutrients back into forms that plants can use, creating the entire foundation of terrestrial food webs. Mycorrhizal fungi form symbiotic relationships with plant root systems, extending the plant's effective root network and helping it access water and nutrients across a much larger area than its actual roots could reach alone. Soil bacteria fix atmospheric nitrogen into forms usable by plants, a service that industrial agriculture spends enormous amounts of money and energy trying to replicate artificially through synthetic fertilizer production. Healthy soil teeming with this kind of microbial density and diversity, is also significantly more resistant to erosion, more capable of retaining water, and more productive for agriculture than depleted soil, which is part of why modern industrial farming practices that degrade soil biology over time are increasingly recognized as a long-term agricultural and ecological problem, not just an environmental abstraction. Story 17. Rats genuinely laugh when you tickle them. This is one of those discoveries that makes you reconsider the inner experience of animals you'd probably never thought about having an inner experience at all. Rats, yes, the rodents most people associate with infestation and disease, produce a specific vocalization when tickled that researchers studying the behavior describe, without much hedging, as laughter. A National Geographic feature based on a 2023 German study documented researchers tickling lab rats and recording their responses, both behavioral and acoustic. The rats produced high-frequency vocalizations, well outside human hearing range, requiring specialized recording equipment to detect, that are associated specifically with positive emotional states in rats, the same category of vocalization they produce during play with other rats. Critically, the rats didn't just passively tolerate the tickling. They actively sought it out, chasing after the researcher's hand when it was withdrawn, in behavior that closely mirrors how a ticklish person or a playful dog might pursue continued contact during a positive interaction rather than trying to escape it. This research builds on a longer scientific history of study into rat emotional and social behavior. Earlier research by neuroscientist Jacques Panksepp had already established that rats produce specific ultrasonic vocalizations during play behavior with each other, and that these vocalizations could be reliably triggered through tickling by human researchers in controlled settings, suggesting the rats were genuinely experiencing something analogous to the positive emotional state humans associate with being tickled by someone they trust. The broader implication researchers draw from this work is about animal cognition and emotional capacity generally. If rats, a species most people consider unremarkable and don't generally extend much emotional consideration toward, demonstrate measurable positive emotional responses in active pursuit of playful physical contact, it raises real questions about the emotional lives of other animals we interact with even more dismissively. Story 18. Bananas are radioactive, but you'd need to eat 1 billion of them to notice bananas contain potassium, which your body needs for proper nerve and muscle function. And potassium has a naturally occurring radioactive isotope called potassium-40 that makes up a tiny but consistent fraction of all potassium found anywhere in nature, including the potassium in your banana. And for that matter, the potassium already inside your own body right now, since potassium is essential to human biology too. This means bananas are, technically and accurately, slightly radioactive. This isn't a hoax or an exaggeration. It's measurable, real, low-level radioactivity. And scientists have actually created a semi-joking but genuinely useful unit of radiation measurement called the banana equivalent dose, used in science communication specifically to help non-specialists understand how trivially small certain radiation exposures actually are by comparing them to the radioactivity of eating a single banana. Joe Schwartz, PhD, director of McGill University's Office for Science and Society, has addressed this directly. You would need to eat approximately 1 billion bananas in a single sitting to receive a fatal dose of radiation from the potassium-40 content. This is obviously comprehensively impossible. You would die from simply consuming that volume of food long before radiation became a relevant concern. and no human stomach or digestive system could process anywhere close to that quantity, regardless of radioactivity. The actual point of the banana radioactivity fact, beyond being a fun piece of trivia, is to provide perspective on how radiation exposure works generally. We are constantly exposed to small amounts of background radiation from natural sources: the food we eat, the ground we stand on, cosmic rays from space, and the human body has evolved within and alongside this baseline level of exposure without it posing meaningful health risk. The banana isn't dangerous. It's a useful reminder that the word radioactive describes a spectrum of intensity, not a single binary category of danger. Story 19. Hot water can freeze faster than cold water, and nobody fully knows why this genuinely defies basic intuition. Under certain specific conditions, water that starts out hot can freeze into ice faster than water that starts out cold. The phenomenon is named the Mpemba effect, after Erasto Mpemba, a Tanzanian secondary school student who, in the 1960s, noticed while making homemade ice cream that his mixture froze faster when he put it into the freezer immediately after boiling it, still hot, rather than waiting for it to cool to room temperature first, as his classmates were doing with their own mixtures. Mpemba reported this observation to his physics teacher, who initially dismissed it as nonsense. But Mpemba persisted, eventually connecting with a physicist named Denise Osborne, who took the observation seriously enough to test it experimentally and ultimately co-published a paper confirming the effect was real and reproducible under specific conditions, with Mpemba as co-author. What's genuinely remarkable is that more than half a century later, the scientific community still doesn't have full consensus on exactly why this happens, though several mechanisms have been proposed and likely all contribute under different conditions. One leading explanation involves the hot water being further from thermodynamic equilibrium initially, which somehow alters the cooling dynamics in ways that favor faster freezing. Another proposed mechanism involves evaporative cooling. Hot water loses mass to evaporation as it cools, meaning there's simply less water left to freeze by the time it reaches freezing temperature, which can speed up the overall process. A third theory points to frost formation. Cold water placed directly in a freezer tends to form an insulating layer of frost on its surface as it approaches freezing, which paradoxically slows further heat loss from the water beneath, while hot water's different cooling dynamics may avoid or delay this insulating frost layer. A simple kitchen observation by a teenager turned into a genuine, still partially unresolved physics puzzle that professional researchers continue actively studying. Story 20, there are more trees on Earth than stars. In the Milky Way, this comparison sounds like it should obviously favor the stars. After all, we're talking about an entire galaxy versus the trees on a single planet, but the actual numbers flip the intuition completely. NASA's current estimates place the number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy somewhere between 100 billion and 400 billion, depending on the specific counting methodology and which regions of the galaxy are included in the estimate. The galactic core is notoriously difficult to survey precisely due to dust obscuration. That's a genuinely enormous number by any everyday standard of comparison. And yet, a 2015 paper published in the journal Nature, using a combination of satellite imagery, ground-based forest density surveys, and statistical modeling across every forested region on the planet, estimated the total global tree population at approximately 3.04 trillion. That number is somewhere between roughly 7, 5, and 30 times larger than even the high end of the Milky Way's stellar population estimate, depending on which specific star count you're comparing against. This finding actually came as a surprise to the researchers involved. Earlier, much rougher estimates of global tree population, often cited before this more rigorous 2015 study, had placed the number at only around 400 billion, which would have put trees and stars in roughly the same general order of magnitude. The more careful satellite and survey-based methodology used in the 2015 paper revealed that earlier estimates had substantially undercounted global forest density. particularly in tropical and boreal forest regions that are harder to survey comprehensively. The same paper also found that human activity has reduced global tree numbers by approximately 46% since the beginning of human civilization, and that roughly 15 billion trees are currently being cut down annually worldwide, which puts the trillions versus billions comparison in a considerably more sobering light than the trivia fact alone initially suggests. Story 21. You have at least 145 genes that came from bacteria, fungi, and viruses. The standard story of evolution most people learn involves a clean vertical lineage, genes passed down from parent to offspring, generation after generation, in an unbroken chain stretching back through the entire human evolutionary tree. What that story leaves out is a process called horizontal gene transfer, in which genetic material moves sideways between unrelated species rather than down through direct ancestry. And a study published in the journal Genome Biology found that the human genome contains as many as 145 genes that arrive this way, transferred in from bacteria, fungi, other single-celled organisms, and viruses, rather than being inherited from our direct evolutionary ancestors. This is a genuinely significant finding, because horizontal gene transfer has long been understood as common and important in bacterial evolution. It's actually one of the primary mechanisms by which antibiotic resistance spreads rapidly between different bacterial species, since bacteria can directly exchange genetic material with each other in ways that don't require traditional reproduction. Finding clear evidence of the same basic mechanism having contributed meaningfully to human genetic makeup challenges the assumption that this process is exclusive to, or primarily relevant for, microorganisms. The specific genes identified through this kind of horizontal transfer aren't trivial or inactive genetic junk sitting unused in our DNA. Researchers have found that many of them are involved in active metabolic processes within human cells, suggesting they've been functionally integrated into human biology over evolutionary time, rather than simply persisting as inert genetic leftovers from some ancient infection or microbial encounter. The broader implication is a genuinely significant complication to the traditional, cleanly vertical tree of life model of evolution that most people learned in school. Our genetic history isn't just a straight line of inheritance from ancestor to descendant. It includes genuine genetic borrowing across entirely different kingdoms of life, picked up along the way through mechanisms scientists are still working to fully understand and catalog. Story 22. Every one of your 36 trillion cells contains a complete copy of 3 billion DNA base, pairs the scale of information storage happening inside your own body right now is genuinely difficult to hold in your head properly, even when you already know the basic facts. According to research published in Nature documenting the human genome, the complete human genetic code consists of more than 3 billion individual base pairs of DNA, organized into more than 25,000 distinct genes. Here's the part that actually breaks most people's intuition about scale. That entire 3 billion base pair genome isn't stored once, somewhere centrally in your body, the way a hard drive might store a single master file. It exists as a complete copy inside the nucleus of nearly every one of your cells, and the adult human body contains somewhere between 28 and 36 trillion individual cells. That means you are, at this exact moment, carrying somewhere in the range of 28 to 36 trillion, essentially complete copies of your entire genetic blueprint, distributed throughout every tissue and organ in your body simultaneously. If you were to take the DNA from a single human cell and stretch it out into a straight line, it would measure approximately 2 meters in length, meaning the DNA inside one microscopic cell, if uncoiled, would be taller than most adult humans. Multiply that length by the trillions of cells in your body, and you get a number so large it loses intuitive meaning. But it's frequently cited that the total length of DNA in a single human body, if fully stretched out and connected end to end, would reach from the Earth to the Sun and back multiple times over. This isn't redundant storage in any wasteful sense. Different cells activate different portions of this shared genetic blueprint to become skin cells, neurons, muscle cells, or any of the hundreds of other specialized cell types your body needs, all working from the identical underlying genetic source code packed individually into nearly every living cell you have. Story 23. It rains diamonds on Neptune and Uranus, and possibly 2.2 million pounds a year on Saturn. This sounds like the kind of thing a science fiction writer made up for dramatic effect, except researchers have actually recreated the relevant conditions in a laboratory and confirmed the underlying physics is sound. The atmospheres of Neptune and Uranus contain significant amounts of methane, and deep within those atmospheres, the pressure and temperature conditions become extreme enough to break apart methane molecules, freeing up individual carbon atoms that, under the right conditions, can crystallize directly into diamond structures. Researchers achieved this confirmation by using a combination of powerful lasers and diamond anvil presses to recreate the extreme pressure and temperature conditions believed to exist within these ice giant planets' interiors, then observing the carbon-containing materials under those simulated conditions to directly confirm diamond formation occurs exactly as the theoretical models predicted. This wasn't just calculation. It was experimental validation in a real lab setting, watching diamonds actually form under planetary interior equivalent conditions. The Saturn estimate is more speculative, but follows similar underlying physics, since Saturn's atmosphere has comparable extreme pressure and methane content in its deeper layers. Some researchers have estimated that diamond rain could be occurring at a rate of approximately 2.2 million pounds annually across certain regions of Saturn's atmosphere, based on modeling how methane breakdown and carbon crystallization would proceed under Saturn's specific atmospheric pressure and temperature gradient. It's worth being clear about what this actually means physically. This isn't diamonds falling from a Neptunian sky onto some solid surface the way rain falls onto Earth's ground, since these are gas giant planets without a conventional solid surface in the way Earth has one. The diamonds, once formed deep in the atmosphere, would sink further down through the planet's deep atmospheric layers toward the core under their own weight relative to the surrounding material, essentially raining downward through the planet's gaseous interior rather than onto any walkable ground. Still genuinely diamonds, just not the kind you could ever go collect. Story 24. 2.5 billion Tyrannosaurus rex existed across 127,000 generations. Researchers from the University of California, Berkeley, published findings in April 2021 that produced one of the more satisfying pieces of dinosaur trivia in recent paleontological research: an actual numerical estimate for the total population of Tyrannosaurus rex that ever existed across the species' entire time on Earth. Not all alive simultaneously, but cumulatively across the full span of the species' existence. The researchers arrived at the figure of approximately 2.5 billion individual T-Rexes existing across roughly 127,000 generations by working through a careful chain of inference involving several independently estimable biological variables: the typical age at which T-Rex individuals reached maturity, their average adult body size and corresponding population density that the available ecosystem and food supply could realistically support, their energy requirements relative to body size, and the total estimated duration of the species' existence based on the fossil record's known time span. This kind of population estimate matters scientifically beyond being an impressive headline number, because it gives paleontologists a framework for thinking about extinction risk, genetic diversity, and ecological dynamics for a species we obviously can't observe directly. A population that large, sustained across that many successive generations, suggests T-Rex was a genuinely successful, ecologically stable apex predator for a meaningful stretch of geological time, rather than a rare or precariously balanced species existing on the margins of extinction throughout its run. The research also highlighted how much remains genuinely uncertain in paleontology, despite headline-friendly precise sounding numbers. The 2.5 billion estimate comes with substantial margins of error built into the underlying calculation, since it depends on several variables, like exact population density and ecosystem carrying capacity, that can only be approximated rather than measured directly from fossils that are tens of millions of years old. It's a remarkably specific number, built from remarkably uncertain inputs, which is itself an interesting statement about how modern paleontology actually works. Story 25: water can exist as a gas, liquid, and solid simultaneously. At one exact point, this is a genuinely strange property of physical matter that most people never learn about despite using water constantly throughout their entire lives. Every pure substance has what's called a triple point, a single, extremely specific combination of temperature and pressure at which all three classical states of matter, solid, liquid, and can coexist simultaneously, in stable equilibrium with each other, according to research from the University of California, Santa Cruz. For water specifically, the triple point occurs at a temperature of just above freezing, 0.1 degrees Celsius, combined with a pressure of 0.006 atmospheres, which is dramatically lower than the standard atmospheric pressure of 1 atm that we experience at sea level every day. This is why you don't encounter water's triple point in ordinary daily life. The pressure required is far below normal atmospheric conditions, meaning you'd need a specialized, sealed chamber with precisely controlled, very low pressure to actually witness it occurring. Inside such a controlled chamber, at exactly that temperature and pressure combination, you would observe something that looks genuinely bizarre if you didn't understand the underlying physics: ice, liquid water, and water vapor, all existing within the same sealed container at the same time, in a stable state, rather than one phase rapidly converting into another, the way you'd see ice melting or water boiling under ordinary conditions. The three states sit in genuine equilibrium with each other, rather than one phase dominating and consuming the others. Every distinct substance has its own unique triple point, different temperature and pressure combination, which makes the triple point a useful and remarkably precise reference standard for calibrating extremely accurate thermometers and pressure measuring instruments in scientific and industrial context, since it represents an exact, reproducible physical condition rather than an approximate or variable one. Story 26. Helium can flow uphill and defy gravity when cooled enough. When liquid helium is cooled to within just a few degrees of absolute zero, specifically approaching its boiling point of negative 460 degrees Fahrenheit, it undergoes a genuinely strange transition into what physicists call a superfluid state. According to reporting in Scientific American on this well-established but consistently startling phenomenon, a superfluid is a state of matter that flows with literally zero viscosity, meaning it experiences absolutely no internal friction or resistance to flow whatsoever, which produces behavior that looks like it's actively defying basic physics, even though it's following well-understood quantum mechanical principles. Superfluid helium can climb up and over the walls of a container it's poured into, seemingly working against gravity, in a phenomenon related to something physicists call the Raman film effect. The superfluid forms an extremely thin film that creeps up the container's interior surface due to the combination of zero viscosity and the helium's attraction to the container material, eventually flowing entirely up and over the rim. It can also leak directly through gaps and pores in container materials that are so microscopically small they would completely contain any normal liquid without issue, because the superfluid's zero friction flow allows it to pass through openings that would stop ordinary fluids entirely. There's a separate, much more practical helium fact worth knowing. While helium is the second most abundant element in the entire observable universe, breathing it directly, the classic party trick of inhaling helium from a balloon to produce a temporarily high-pitched voice carries genuine documented health risk. Helium displaces oxygen in your lungs, and research published in the journal Injury Prevention has documented cases of asphyxiation and, in some instances, death, particularly when helium is inhaled directly from a pressurized tank rather than a balloon, since the pressurized delivery can cause additional physical injury to lung tissue beyond the oxygen displacement risk alone. The funny voice trick carries more genuine risk than the party context usually suggests. Story 27. A single solar flare releases energy equivalent to 1 billion hydrogen bomb solar flares are sudden, intense bursts of radiation released from the sun's surface. And according to NASA, the energy released in a single significant flare event is genuinely staggering when you try to put it into comparable human terms, roughly equivalent to the simultaneous detonation of 1 billion hydrogen bombs. These eruptions occur when the sun's powerful and constantly shifting magnetic field lines, which can become twisted and stressed due to the differential rotation of the sun's plasma at different latitudes, suddenly reconnect and release the stored magnetic energy in an explosive burst. This energy release accelerates charged particles to extremely high speeds and produces radiation across the electromagnetic spectrum, from radio waves through to X-rays and gamma rays, all released within a remarkably short time frame, often just minutes for the most intense phase of a major flare. The reason human civilization isn't directly devastated by an event of this magnitude occurring roughly 93 million miles away from us is Earth's atmosphere and protective magnetic field, which together absorb and deflect the vast majority of the dangerous radiation before it can reach the surface where we actually live. Without this natural shielding, the radiation from significant solar flares would pose serious direct biological danger to life on Earth's surface. That said, solar flares and their associated phenomena, particularly coronal mass ejections, which are massive eruptions of solar plasma and magnetic field material distinct from, but often associated with flares, can still cause meaningful disruption here on Earth, even without directly harming us biologically. These events can disturb Earth's magnetic field enough to induce unexpected electrical currents in long conductive infrastructure like power grids and pipelines, potentially causing blackouts, and can also disrupt satellite communications, GPS accuracy, and radio transmissions. The 1989 Quebec blackout and the 1859 Carrington event, the most powerful documented geomagnetic storm in recorded history, both demonstrate that even from 93 million miles away, the sun can meaningfully disrupt our modern technological infrastructure. Story 28. It's physically impossible to burp normally in space. This is a genuinely strange consequence of zero gravity that most people have never thought about, but it makes complete physical sense once you understand the actual mechanics of what a burp is and why gravity matters to the process. On Earth, when gas builds up in your stomach, typically from swallowed air or as a byproduct of digestion, gravity does important work for you during the burping process by keeping the solid and liquid contents of your stomach settled toward the bottom, while the gas, being less dense, naturally rises toward the top and escapes upward through your esophagus and out your mouth relatively cleanly, separate from the denser stomach contents. In a genuinely weightless environment, like the conditions astronauts experience in orbit, this gravity-dependent separation simply doesn't happen because there's no consistent up or down direction for the lighter gas to preferentially rise relative to the denser liquid and solid stomach contents. Without gravity sorting the stomach's contents by density, the gas bubble that would normally rise cleanly to the top instead remains mixed in with the surrounding liquid and partially digested solid food. This means that when an astronaut attempts to burp in zero gravity, what actually comes up the esophagus isn't a clean release of gas. It's gas still mixed together with some of the stomach's liquid and solid contents, which means burping in space functionally becomes a small, partial version of throwing up, rather than a clean release of trapped gas. This is a real, documented physiological phenomenon that NASA's astronaut training and onboard nutrition planning has to specifically account for. It's part of why astronauts are advised to avoid certain carbonated beverages and particular gas-producing foods during missions, since the inability to burp normally and cleanly in zero gravity makes gas buildup considerably more uncomfortable and harder to relieve than it would be back on Earth's surface. where gravity quietly does most of the separating work for us, without us ever having to. Think about it. Story 29. Scientists figured out how to turn plastic bottles into vanilla flavoring. This sounds like exactly the kind of headline that gets oversimplified into something misleading. So let's be precise about what actually happened. A 2021 study published in the journal Green Chemistry demonstrated that genetically engineered bacteria could successfully convert terephthalic acid, a chemical compound derived from breaking down PET plastic, the type used in most disposable plastic water and soda bottles, into vanillin, which is the primary flavor and aroma compound responsible for vanilla taste and scent. The research team's motivation wasn't primarily about plastic waste disposal, though that's an obvious and appealing secondary benefit. It was driven by genuine, growing commercial demand for vanillin. The study's authors specifically note that demand for vanillin is increasing rapidly, driven by its use across an enormous range of products well beyond just food flavoring, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, cleaning products, and even certain herbicide formulations all use vanillin as an ingredient. Natural vanillin, extracted directly from vanilla bean pods through conventional methods, is expensive and resource-intensive to produce at the scale global demand requires, which is exactly why most vanilla flavor in mass-produced food products today is already synthetic vanillin, produced through various industrial chemical processes, rather than extracted from actual vanilla orchids. This particular research demonstrated a genuinely novel pathway, using bacteria to biologically engineer a conversion process that takes a plastic waste product as its starting material and produces a commercially valuable flavor compound as the end result, combining genetic engineering with industrial sustainability goals in a single elegant pathway. It's worth being clear, as the researchers themselves emphasized, that this study demonstrated technical feasibility, not safety, for human consumption. Nobody has confirmed the resulting vanillin from this specific plastic-derived process is approved or safe for use in food products intended for people to actually eat that would require substantial additional safety testing, regulatory review, and purification validation well beyond what this initial proof-of-concept research established. So no, you can't yet eat ice cream flavored with your old water bottles. But the chemistry pathway to eventually doing so safely now technically exists. Story 30. Nearly half the cells in your body aren't even human. For a long time, the commonly repeated estimate in popular science communication was that the human body contained roughly 10 bacterial cells for every 1 human cell, a striking statistic suggesting we were, numerically speaking, far more bacteria than human. More careful and updated research has revised this estimate substantially, but the actual figure remains genuinely remarkable in its own right. Current expert estimates suggest the human body contains approximately 39 trillion bacterial cells alongside approximately 30 trillion human cells, which works out to a ratio of roughly 1.3 bacterial cells for every human cell in your body, nowhere near the old 10:1 estimate, but still meaning that bacterial cells slightly outnumber your own human cells in terms of raw cell count. The reason this revised, more modest ratio doesn't translate into bacteria dominating your visible body mass or your sense of physical self comes down entirely to relative size. Bacterial cells are dramatically smaller than human cells on average. Despite outnumbering human cells, the bacteria living in and on your body collectively account for only about 1 to 3% of your total body mass. Since you'd need an enormous number of these microscopic bacterial cells to add up to the mass of even a single one of your considerably larger human cells. This bacterial population, collectively referred to as your microbiome, with the largest concentrations living throughout your digestive tract, isn't simply along for the ride as passive freeloaders. These bacterial communities perform genuinely essential functions for human health that we cannot fully replicate ourselves, aiding in the digestion of certain foods our own digestive enzymes can't fully break down, synthesizing specific vitamins our bodies need but can't produce internally, training and regulating aspects of our immune system's development and ongoing function, And increasingly, research suggests even influencing mood and certain aspects of brain function through what scientists now call the gut-brain axis. You are, quite literally and continuously, a walking ecosystem rather than a single self-contained organism. Story 31 men are far more likely to be colorblind than women, and its pure genetics colorblindness affects men at significantly higher rates than women. And the reason isn't about anything related to lifestyle, environment, or eye health differences between the genders. It comes down entirely to a specific quirk of human genetics involving chromosome inheritance, according to the National Eye Institute. The genes responsible for the most common forms of colorblindness, specifically the red-green colorblindness that accounts for the significant majority of all colorblindness cases, are located on the X chromosome. This matters enormously because of how chromosomes are inherited differently between men and women. Women have 2 X chromosomes, one inherited from each parent, while men have only 1 X chromosome inherited from their mother, paired with 1 Y chromosome inherited from their father. This genetic architecture creates a crucial protective backup system for women that men simply don't have. If a woman inherits a colorblindness causing gene variant on one of her 2 X chromosomes, she still has a second X chromosome, and as long as that second chromosome carries a properly functioning version of the relevant gene, it can effectively compensate for the defective copy, allowing her to perceive color normally despite carrying the colorblindness gene. Men, having only a single X chromosome, have no such backup system available if the colorblindness gene variant is present on their one and only X chromosome. There's no second functioning copy from another X chromosome to compensate, so the colorblindness condition is directly expressed. This same X-linked inheritance pattern explains why women who carry the gene on just one of their 2 X chromosomes, despite not being colorblind themselves, can still pass the gene on to their children, meaning a woman can be an unaffected genetic carrier who nonetheless has a meaningful chance of having a colorblind son, depending on which X chromosome variant gets passed along during conception. Story 32. We genuinely don't know what 96% of the universe is made of. This is one of those facts that, once you actually sit with it, should be genuinely unsettling in the best possible scientific way. Despite centuries of accumulated astronomical observation and increasingly sophisticated physics, the honest current scientific consensus is that approximately 96% of the entire universe consists of substances that remain fundamentally undetectable to direct human observation or instrumentation: dark matter and dark energy. Dark matter is the term physicists use for a form of matter that doesn't emit, absorb, or reflect light or any other form of electromagnetic radiation, which means it cannot be directly observed or detected using telescopes or any light-based instrument, regardless of how sensitive or advanced. Its existence is inferred entirely indirectly. Through its measurable gravitational effects on visible matter, galaxies rotate, and clusters of galaxies move in ways that simply cannot be explained by the gravitational influence of only the visible matter we can actually observe within them. There has to be additional mass present, exerting real gravitational pull that we cannot see or otherwise directly detect. Dark energy is an entirely separate and even more mysterious phenomenon, representing the unknown force or property of space itself that appears to be responsible for the accelerating expansion of the universe. And critically, this expansion isn't just continuing, it's actually speeding up over cosmic time, which conventional physics based only on visible matter and known forces cannot adequately explain on its own. Combined, current cosmological models suggest dark matter and dark energy together account for roughly 96% of the total mass energy content of the entire universe, leaving the ordinary matter that makes up stars, planets, your own body, and literally everything you have ever directly observed or interacted with at just around 4% of everything that actually exists. The particles or fields responsible for dark matter and dark energy don't appear to interact with regular matter or light in any way we've yet managed to detect, which means the vast majority of physical reality remains, quite literally, invisible and unexplained. Story 33. Bats carry deadly viruses without getting sick, and scientists finally know why bats have a long-standing reputation in virology as unusually effective viral reservoirs. Animals capable of carrying and transmitting an unusually wide range of dangerous viruses, including various coronaviruses, while themselves experiencing little to no apparent illness from infections that would be severely harmful or fatal to most other mammals, humans very much included. Thomas Kepler, PhD, a professor of microbiology at Boston University, notes that virologists have been specifically interested in bats for a long time, partly because of their relationship with rabies, a virus that is reliably and almost universally fatal once symptomatic in essentially every other mammal species that contracts it, including humans. Bats, notably, can contract rabies and do occasionally become sick from it, but they rarely actually die from the infection the way other infected mammals almost invariably do, suggesting something genuinely different is happening in their immune response compared to other mammalian species. Research into bat genetics and immunology has identified part of the underlying explanation. Bats possess an unusually robust and active set of genes specifically responsible for antiviral activity within their immune systems, compared to most other mammals studied. Their innate immune response appears to be calibrated differently. Some research suggests bats have evolved a kind of dampened inflammatory response, combined with heightened baseline antiviral defenses, which together may allow them to tolerate viral loads that would trigger a severely damaging, potentially fatal level of inflammatory immune overreaction in other species, including the kind of severe inflammatory immune response that makes certain viral infections so dangerous in humans specifically. This research has taken on considerably more public significance and urgency since coronaviruses with apparent bat origins have been linked to several serious human disease outbreaks in recent decades. Understanding precisely how bats manage to coexist with viruses that devastate other species could potentially offer genuinely valuable insight into developing better antiviral treatments and immune-modulating therapies for humans. By studying and potentially learning from a biological system that's already solved through millions of years of evolution, problems that human medicine is still actively working to address.